Hello, everyone, and welcome back yet again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here, I do want to remind you yet again that if throughout the show you feel like you want to interact with it a little bit more, you can do this in different ways. You can do it for the super chats, super things, and super stickers features here on YouTube. You can just leave a comment, or if you feel so inclined, press that $, leave a tip or donation. It is greatly appreciated by all concerned, especially me and my fellow podcasters who love doing these shows, and we love hearing your opinions about them as well. It just makes the show and thus the network that much better, and we appreciate it in advance. But without further ado, let's jump into our second segment of the day here on the show. And it's a segment that I love doing because it sheds light on how you have to manage your fantasy football team. It's my weekly injury report. It's also kind of a sad segment because you never want to talk about guys who could have been important in your fantasy football weekend going down. But it is kind of necessary in order to really see how you can finagle your fantasy football team and move different pieces around and learn how to strategize a little bit better based off of the injuries we've seen. And this week, there aren't many hugely impactful ones. A lot of these are small injuries, and some of these players may even be expected to play this week. But they're still important in terms of how it could affect their play and how it could affect your team's play as well. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Let's start off with a more positive outlook on injury sustained last week. Marvin Harrison Jr. sustained a concussion last week. He is expected to play this Monday against the Chargers, and what this means fantasy-wise is hugely different than what it would have meant had he sat out this game, because in this Monday night matchup against the Chargers defense that is sneakily better than people give them credit for, I feel like the Cardinals offense in general, whether you're a Marvin Harrison Jr. owner yourself, or potentially, say, a James Conner or Trey McBride or Kyler Murray owner, would not have clicked had Marvin Harrison Jr. not there. I think he is the engine that drives the car for the Cardinals offense, and without him, I think that they definitely would have looked a little bit more lackluster against this Chargers defense. But now I give them more of a fighting chance in this matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers defense that I really actually like. So that's the good news about Marvin Harrison Jr. and the Cardinals offense, but let's get into a couple more drastic injuries here. Starting off with Jerome Ford. Now, this is one that feels a little bit weird because there's a lot of positivity surrounding Nick Chubb coming back, but no matter what happens in the Browns' backfield, it won't matter that much if Deshaun Watson is still playing like he is. Let's be real here, because as much as I love Nick Chubb and respect what he can do when healthy for this Browns team, he's entering his age 30 season soon. And this isn't like when he suffered the same injury in college. And when he's entering the NFL, he had time, he was younger, and he could maintain his body a little bit better, perhaps. This injury feels a little bit more like one that does not bode well for his future, whether in the NFL or as a Cleveland Brown. But at the end of the day, if you are the Cleveland Browns, chances are, if you want to see any level of success out of Deshaun Watson, you got to get a run game going somehow. And so, even with this Ford injury, and I don't necessarily know how long he'll be out for, I think that any kind of positive news surrounding Nick Chubb has to be a glimmer of hope for this Browns offense right now. But we wish for a speedy recovery for Jerome Ford, kind of stepping up in his presence, in his stead, rather, in an admirable way, almost, Jerome Ford. Yes, he can catch a lot of flack sometimes because he's not as potent as Nick Chubb is, but he still was serviceable with this Cleveland Browns offense. And if this is the last time we see him in a RB1 role, then we wish him the best for the rest of his career. But let's get into another hamstring injury here. Much more serious one, I believe, in Dallas Goedert. I really was beginning to like him at the tight end position from a fantasy perspective, but not for nothing. I don't think it immediately impacts the Philadelphia Eagles offense as much. They did get back A.J. Brown, and he was perhaps the difference maker in that game against Cleveland where they were really struggling. So I don't know if this will impact the other players on this Philadelphia Eagles offense, but if you were really high on Dallas Goedert as much as I was, the potentially had you picked him up, he is kind of one of those players who it's going to feel a little bit weird and awkward to keep him on his bench for so long after such a promising start to the season for him. But I do think that if you own, say, an A.J. Brown or a Saquon Barkley, you should be fine going forward, even though I am a little bit skeptical about what this Philadelphia Eagles offense even is right now. But it is what it is, and I think that the Philadelphia Eagles offense should be fine, even though the man running the show might not be the best option for them. But I still like their weapons that they have at their disposal. And now let's talk about a team we kind of talked about yesterday, and this one is not pretty. The Saints. And I really don't know going forward how this season will now play out after such a promising start. After 2 weeks, we were singing the Saints' praises, right? Derek Carr looked like a competent NFL quarterback, maybe even a top 10 guy if you want to go that far. Alvin Kamara was really turning back the clock. You had Shaheed being a deep threat, really scaring defenses, and Chris Olave looked like himself. But now, Spencer Rattler's now stepping in after Derek Carr suffered an injury. Chris Olave goes down last week with a concussion that could spell for more time than expected on the sidelines. And then Rashid Shaheed just announced yesterday that season-ending knee surgery will end his season. So, this is a calamity for the New Orleans Saints organization. You're now looking at Juwan Johnson potentially, Bub Means as your top receivers, and it really goes to show that a team can quickly lose its fantasy appeal. Because, not for nothing, even though a lot of people may not have been as high on the Saints offense as for what they saw for the first 2 weeks, but you still value guys like Olave and Kamara and what they can do. And now that one of those guys is injured and the other is not performing like he did for the first couple weeks of the season, you now are starting to see how an offense that really is papering over the cracks looks. Tonight's game I don't expect to be very pretty for the Saints team. And I don't expect a lot of fantasy football managers to be hearing much good news about Olave's injury or Shaheed's injury for that matter. We already know about Shaheed's injury thus far. But if I were a fantasy football manager, I would immediately sell high on some of these players, especially Kamara and Shaheed, because they're starting to lose a lot of value the more injuries that pile up. So look for this team to definitely not look pretty. But then again, there could be some hidden gems that emerge for this team as well. I liked what Bub Means did in the last game. Got his and Rattler's first career NFL touchdowns, so that was cool. But there still is not that much upside outside of what you've already lost. But let's get into the more positive news. Or maybe a little bit more positive news, because I don't know how people feel about some of these players I'm about to mention in terms of a fantasy perspective. Especially this guy, Anthony Richardson. After suffering an oblique injury, sitting out for I believe it was the past 2 weeks, he's looking ready to start against the Miami Dolphins. Now the reason why I say that a lot of people might be skeptical about the Colts starting Anthony Richardson is because they don't necessarily look that much better with him. And I feel like even though Joe Flacco didn't win both games and they didn't put up that many points, he did look more competent than what Anthony Richardson has looked like. But then again, if you're the Indianapolis Colts, you want to start Richardson as much as possible to see what you have in him at the very least. You want him to gain this vital experience early on in his career and not, waste all the seasons because of the injuries he sustains. So, as much as I'm kind of on the fence about this decision, it does feel, at least from a real life perspective, from an NFL viewer's perspective, that starting Richardson is the right way forward for the Indianapolis Colts. As much as it kind of pains me to say, because I love Joe Flacco, what he's been doing these past couple of years, starting Richardson is the best way for him to gain the necessary experience and understand the NFL level. So, and from a fantasy perspective, I don't know how you would feel about it if you do own him, but I still view him as someone who's not necessarily a QB1 option or a week in, week out starter. He might just be a flex QB2 option in deeper leagues, and we leave it at that. But who knows how he'll look moving forward. And then another interesting kind of storyline here, Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers, practicing for the first time since being shot a couple of months ago, I believe about a month ago. And not for nothing, if Ricky Pearsall is as valuable as the 49ers believe he can be sneakily fun to watch in this 49ers offense, because you have all these weapons, and if all of them come back at a certain level of time, within a certain level of time, then Ricky Pearsall could be a wild card in this offense, because you have to worry about so much. You have to worry about Debo. You have to worry about Kittle's physicality. You have to worry about if McCaffrey comes back, his explosiveness. And then you have to worry about this kid who could be one of the better pure route runners in this draft class. I really do believe that Ricky Pearsall is a very intelligent receiver, and it's going to show in Kyle Shanahan's scheme. So look for Ricky Pearsall, when he gets fully worked into this offense, to really be a nice little success story yet again for the Shanahan kind of scheme. And then last but not least, I do want to talk a little bit about the PUP players, how they could impact their teams. Chubb, we already know about him, but Hawkinson is another story, and I think he could definitely benefit the Vikings moving forward as someone who could be a nice little weapon against zone-heavy teams. He can find the soft spots and really help Sam Darnold in terms of not necessarily focusing too much on the explosive play, but calming him down in certain moments in time. So look for TJ Hawkinson once he comes back to be an X factor for the Vikings. Let me know what you think about my injury report in the comments, whether or not you agree with me, whether or not you want to talk about some other injuries as well that could impact fantasy. But coming up on the other side of this quick break, I make my picks for the week. Chris's picks of the week in some big NFL games. You definitely don't want to miss this after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports